And joining me now is political strategist Bruce Hawker and political consultant Grahame Morris from Canberra. Bruce Hawker, just because you're here with me in the studio, first to you, Dyson Heydon's decision today. Are you surprised?
Not all that much, but I still think it was probably the wrong decision for a number of reasons. I think it was always going to be very hard for him sitting in judgment on himself and, of course, then exonerating himself. It doesn't look really good in the public's eyes. And frankly, he did attend, or did intend to attend a Liberal Party event, and he was going to give a speech. There's a greater
capacity to that, don't you? His argument is that even if you could, prove some kind of bias against the Labor Party, he's still, essentially smart enough to be able to judge the Royal Commission on merit.
Yeah, well, I guess it's a question, as he always says, about apprehended bias. And I think in the public's mind, if this was something which had happened after the Royal Commission had ended, well, they'd say, well, fair enough. But when it's actually in the middle of its hearings, and this was always a very political exercise from the outset, no one doubts that, I don't think Tony Abbott would even deny it, then it leaves a smell about it. And in fact, I think it's the worst possible outcome for the Royal Commission. I think they probably would have been better for him to have gone and for the inquiry to continue, and they can find what they want to find about the unions and so forth. It was a problem, I think, from the moment that he agreed to speak at a Liberal Party event.
Grahame Morris, do you think that's true? Do you think when the findings of this Royal Commission will be handed down, they'll be tainted by this?
Well, I hope not. Look, I think, I've read the submission, his judgment on himself, and essentially he's saying, the trade unions light up all these QCs against him, and it shows why everyone says he's the man for the job, because he demolished them. Absolutely demolished them. And he's saying, let's get back to work tomorrow.
Yes, it is dripping with contempt, this decision, I'd have to say. He goes through and picks holes in the lawyers, the QCs, the Silk's arguments as well, doesn't he, Grahame?
Yeah, but Laura, what surprised me about all of this was the interview you did a moment ago with the Labor Party's Shadow Attorney General. And he's saying, look, I haven't really read it, but I'm going to take a petition to the Governor-General to have Dyson Heydon removed. Now, what sort of a goose would he be? He hasn't even read the damn thing. Hey, look, I was surprised by the decision. Dyson Heydon is saying, look, I can prove to you lawyers that what you're saying is drivel, and he's saying, I can also, if I got a chance, talk to Mr. and Mrs. Average in the street, each of them, and explain why it's drivel. But the hard thing is, how do you overcome to Mr. and Mrs. Average all the headlines that the trade unions and the Labor Party people and some drongo journalists have generated? That's the hard bit for him. Yep. He's demolished the legal people. It's the mum and dad one that's hard.
Can I move on to another issue now, Bruce Hawker? Joe Hockey, again in the headlines today, just as it seemed the government was trying to talk about other things, talk about the economy. Joe Hockey's job apparently at risk if Canning goes badly. Now, Joe Hockey said this afternoon that this is a legacy of the Rudd years, that no journalist really wants to miss out on the story if there's a leadership challenge, and this is just a few within the party agitating against him. Do you think there's some truth to that?
I'm not sure how you can really blame Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard for people inside the Liberal Party leaking against him. I mean, there's obviously a process of some destabilisation going on, and no one is in any doubt about that, and it's aimed essentially at Abbott. Now, the argument that's being put here is that they could toss out Joe as some sort of a sacrificial lamb, hopefully redirect some of their economic policies and get back on the track if they lose Canning. Well, frankly, if they lose Canning, it's not going to be Joe Hockey that they're going to be after, it'll be Tony Abbott. Yep. And I'd be surprised if Abbott would last more than a week after Canning if they lose a seat by that margin. That's 34 or 35 members of Parliament who would lose their seats on that sort of a swing.
Yeah, they are inextricably linked, aren't they, Grahame Morris? The future of, the legacy really of the Prime Minister and Joe Hockey together. Now, what do you think about some of the comments that have been made around this today? We've seen Arthur Sinodinos saying anyone who is leaking against the government should be sacked. Do you think Joe Hockey is at risk?
Well, I agree with Arthur, but, you know, unfortunately for the journalist who wrote the story this morning, there's quite a few people who have been in the same boat on a Sunday at work, including me as a journalist, and you get a phone call saying, we haven't got a front page story, can you beat something up? Blow me down, he did.
We never do that.
They're supposed to have talked to 4 cabinet ministers, 2 of whom said, hey, we're thinking of having an election in March. Well, that makes the whole story piffle. And then I talked to them about, you know, they've told Tony Abbott that Joe Hockey's got to go. And that's news to everyone. And who on earth, which cabinet minister is strong enough and safe enough to go to the boss and say, hey, you know, you ought to get rid of Hockey? The whole thing was piffle.
But what about Arthur Sinodinos's intervention, though, Grahame Morris, saying that essentially everyone should be sacked? I mean, I thought that his intervention today actually made this a bigger story than it needed to be.
Well, I think that's right. But also, you might have noticed he started today on Twitter, so he started with a bang.
Or a tweet.
Yes.
Look, I think it's true. What Arthur was trying to say was, you know, focus on the Labor Party, focus on the by-election, and don't leak. Well, that's true. But I think he was based on a premise that, you know, that the article itself this morning was full of cabinet ministers who leaked. Well, didn't happen.
Bruce Hawker, are you getting flashbacks here? Is this all just history repeating, do you think?
Yeah, you get, when this sort of internal talk starts, and I've got no doubt that there would have been 4 cabinet ministers involved in that, if there were 4 ministers mentioned, not by name, but by number, by the journalists. They're not going to lie about those sorts of things. So I'm absolutely certain that would have been the case, that they would have had that number of people talking about it, prepared to engage in a discussion. That's not the sign of a government which is feeling particularly confident about its leader at all. You know, anyone that thinks that Tony Abbott's in good shape at the moment is having themselves on. He is hanging on by a whisker.
Bruce Hawker, Grahame Morris, we will have to leave it there. There's not enough hours in the day, unfortunately. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time. A quick